My name is Paula McDonald. I'm 28 years old. Someone has to stay behind and watch the house. Make sure the animals do not ruin the drywall if water gets in. My father looked me dead in the eye and said those words while he packed his bags to outrun a Category 4 hurricane. He took the only set of keys left me in the path of the worst storm to hit the Texas Gulf Coast in a decade and drove away. What he did not realize was that leaving me behind to protect his investment was the exact mistake that would leave him and my mother living out of a rundown motel 6 months later. Before I tell you exactly how they lost it all, take a second to hit subscribe. Let me know your age in the comments, and welcome to the Amanda Told Stories channel. Now let me take you back to the moment the power went out. The wind sounded like a freight train tearing through the living room. The glass from the upstairs dormer window gave way with a sickening crack, raining jagged shards onto the hardwood floor. Downstairs, in the suffocating blackness of the central hallway, I tightened my grip on the trembling terrier mix pressed against my chest. The timber of the coastal ranch house groaned. The walls flexed under the sheer force of the storm. No power. No exit. Just the deafening roar of the hurricane and the rhythmic thud of flying debris striking the exterior siding. 12 hours earlier, the sky had hung low, bruised a deep, unnatural purple. The air felt thick enough to chew, heavy with the scent of ozone and impending rain. Donovan stood on the front porch, a hammer in his hand. He drove the final nail into the thick plywood covering the living room window. The sharp sound echoed in the eerie calm before the storm. I stood in the doorway watching him. I wore faded denim and mud-caked boots, my hands rough from years of wrangling strays and assisting the local veterinarian. "You are making a mistake, leaving the upper dormers exposed," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The wind shear up there will be brutal." Donovan did not look at me. He slipped the hammer into his tool belt and dusted his hands. His khaki slacks and crisp polo shirt looked out of place against the backdrop of an evacuation zone. "The upstairs will hold," he replied, his tone clipped and dismissive. Nancy sat idling in the driveway inside their pristine silver SUV, the air conditioning running, her eyes fixed forward. She did not look at the house. She did not look at her daughter. Donovan stepped past me into the foyer. He picked up a sleek, locked leather briefcase resting on the console table. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the handle. "Are you bringing the photo albums?" I asked, nodding toward the hall closet. "I have the equity papers," Donovan said, his gaze flat. "That is all that matters." He walked back onto the porch and turned to face me. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the heavy brass ring holding the primary keys to the ranch gates and the deadbolts, and slipped them into his jacket. "Leave the spare set," I said. "I need to secure the perimeter once you are on the highway." "No," Donovan said. "You stay inside." Mom took the final car. Someone has to stay and watch the house. Make sure the animals do not ruin the drywall if water gets in. Before I could process the cold calculation in his eyes, Donovan walked to the side of the porch where the heavy gray utility box hung. He opened the metal panel. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping forward, the screen door catching on my boot. "Fire safety," Donovan stated. He reached in and pulled the main breaker switch. The low hum of the refrigerator died. The ceiling fans coasted to a halt. The ambient noise of a living home vanished, replaced by a stifling silence. Donovan slammed the utility panel shut, engaged a heavy padlock, and pocketed that key as well. He walked to the SUV, climbed into the passenger seat, and Nancy accelerated down the gravel driveway without a backward glance. I stood on the porch as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The reality set in. My father had not just secured the house. He had locked me inside, cut the power 12 hours before landfall, and left me in the dark. The hurricane made landfall just past midnight. I did not merely hear the storm arrive. I felt it in my bones. The barometric pressure plummeted so fast, my eardrums popped, sending a sharp, stabbing ache radiating down my jawline. The air inside the hallway grew heavy, thick with the electric metallic scent of ozone and the rancid brine of the churned-up Gulf of Mexico. The coastal ranch house vibrated like a plucked guitar string. Water began to weep under the seams of the sunroom doors, pooling dark and cold on the original hardwood floors. I clicked on my heavy tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the pitch-black foyer, illuminating the dust swirling in the shifting air currents. The water was rising. I had to move the animals upstairs immediately. I started with the heaviest crates. Buster, a terrified pit bull mix I had pulled from a hoarding situation 3 months ago, whimpered inside his rigid plastic carrier. The stench of canine fear filled the tight space. I gripped the metal grate, braced my boots on the slick floorboards, and heaved. My muscles burned as I hauled his kennel up the narrow wooden staircase, step by grueling step. I spent my days at the veterinary clinic restraining panicking mastiffs and wrestling 100-pound sheepdogs onto steel exam tables. Physical labor was my normal. Donovan and Nancy considered sweat a sign of poor planning. They paid people to carry their burdens. Tonight, I was carrying mine alone. I went back down into the rising water for the cats. Then I went down for the injured greyhound. 7 trips up and down those stairs in the suffocating, unventilated heat. My shirt clung to my spine. My palms blistered from gripping the rigid plastic handles of the crates. Outside, the wind shrieked a high-pitched wail that sounded like tearing metal. The ground floor was taking on water fast, perhaps 2 inches already seeping across the expensive baseboards my father loved to brag about. I dragged the final carrier onto the second-floor landing and collapsed against the drywall, gasping for breath. The animals were safe, lined up in the central hallway away from the exterior walls. But the second floor did not feel safe. The house groaned louder up here. The roof shuddered with every sustained gust. I tilted my flashlight toward the vaulted ceiling of the unfinished loft space. The drywall had not been installed yet, leaving the thick wooden rafters exposed to the naked eye. Something caught my attention in the harsh glare of the flashlight beam. The heavy structural roof trusses. Living on the Texas coast, you learn about hurricane clips early. They are thick pieces of galvanized steel designed to anchor the roof to the top plate of the walls. They are the only thing keeping a house from losing its lid in a major storm. I squinted into the beam of light. The steel clips were present, but the heavy bolts hung loose. The steel clamps swung freely in the drafts pushing through the eaves. My breath caught in my throat. Donovan had spent the entire weekend up in this loft last month. He told me he was reinforcing the joints. He told me he was making the house storm-ready. He lied. He did not forget to tighten those bolts. A man who calculates the return on investment for his morning coffee does not simply forget the structural integrity of a multi-million-dollar property. He left them unclamped deliberately. He knew the wind shear hitting the unboarded dormer windows would create a fierce updraft. He wanted the wind to get under the rafters. He wanted the roof to tear off. He needed the insurance company to declare the ranch a total loss. And he locked me inside to ensure no one could interfere with his stage dressing. A deafening crack echoed from the east bedroom. Another window shattered. The wind whipped through the hallway, knocking over a stack of empty water jugs. I had to seek shelter immediately. I grabbed my emergency go bag and herded the animal crates into the master bathroom. It was the only room on the second floor without windows, nestled deep in the center of the floor plan. I shoved the crates into the large walk-in shower and sat on the cold tile floor, leaning my entire body weight against the heavy wooden door to keep it shut against the changing air pressure. I pulled my rugged waterproof tablet from the go bag. The local cell towers were down, but my private network was still broadcasting on a robust battery backup system. I opened the security application. Years ago, I installed a network of heavy-duty, solar-powered trail cameras deep in the woods surrounding the property. I used them to monitor the feral hogs and track the stray dogs people cruelly dumped on the backcountry roads. Those cameras were strapped to ancient, unmoving live oak trees. They were built to survive the harshest natural conditions on Earth. The screen flickered, then loaded the live feeds. Camera 1 showed the front gate thrashing in the wind. Camera 2 showed the rear of the house. I watched in harsh night vision green as the shingles on my roof began to peel away like dead skin. The unboarded windows gaped like black holes swallowing the storm. My father thought he had orchestrated the perfect disaster. He thought the darkness would cover his tracks. He thought leaving me without power meant leaving me blind to his actions. But the trail cameras recorded every single second of the storm. They recorded the exact state of the house. They recorded the deliberate vulnerabilities he left exposed. I set the tablet on my knees and watched the digital timestamp tick forward, building an undeniable record of his betrayal. The walls of the bathroom shook. The terrified dogs whined in the darkness. I hummed a low, steady tune to calm them, a trick I learned during my first year at the vet clinic. I pressed my shoulder harder against the door as a tremendous gust of wind tried to suck it open. My ears popped again. The cold tile seeped through my damp jeans. I did not cry. I did not panic. Anger is a very useful tool when you know exactly how to wield it. My father believed I was just a naive girl playing with rescue dogs on a property she did not deserve. He underestimated my endurance. He underestimated the strong bones my grandfather built into this house. Most importantly, he underestimated my preparation. The hours crawled by. The shriek of the wind slowly deepened into a hollow roar, then a steady, punishing howl. The eye of the hurricane was passing, offering a brief, deceptive silence before the back wall of the storm slammed into the coast. I stayed on the floor. I kept my weight against the door. I waited for the dawn, knowing that surviving the wind and the water was only the first test. The true disaster would arrive when the sun came up and the phone lines finally reconnected. The relentless shrieking of the wind finally died away, just as the first sliver of dawn crept over the Texas horizon. The transition from a deafening roar to an eerie, hollow quiet felt abrupt, leaving a ringing sensation deep in my ears. I slowly stood up from the hard tile of the windowless bathroom, my joints stiff and aching from hours spent braced against the heavy door. Buster, the pit bull mix, lifted his head and offered a tentative tail wag. The other animals remained curled in their plastic crates, exhausted by the night of terror. I unlatched the carriers one by one, letting them stretch their legs in the confined space of the second-floor landing. I needed to assess the structural damage. I clicked off the heavy tactical flashlight and walked down the hallway, my boots crunching over the jagged shards of glass from the shattered dormer window. The morning light filtering through the broken frame revealed a bruised, overcast sky. I looked up at the vaulted ceiling. The exposed wooden rafters stood firm. The galvanized steel hurricane clips that my father had deliberately left unclamped were rattling slightly in the residual morning breeze, but they had not given way. The roof remained anchored. My grandfather had framed this coastal ranch with old-growth timber back in the 70s, sourcing the thickest beams he could find. He understood the brutal nature of the Gulf Coast. He built this structure to endure the storms. My father had tried to use the hurricane to erase that legacy, but the bones of this house were much stronger than his sabotage. I made my way down the narrow wooden staircase. The air on the ground floor felt dense and humid, carrying the distinct smell of wet earth and pine needles. I expected to wade into a flooded disaster zone. Instead, my boots met dry hardwood. The storm surge had pushed a few inches of water under the sunroom doors during the peak of the hurricane, but the grading of the property had worked exactly as my grandfather designed it. The water had retreated back down the sloping lawn toward the bay. The antique Persian rugs in the living room were slightly damp at the edges, and a few minor branches had scattered across the porch, but the interior remained pristine. My father had locked me in the dark, hoping the rising tide and the tearing winds would consume the property. He failed. I walked to the front door and stared at the thick plywood Donovan had nailed over the frame. He had taken the brass keys, trapping me inside behind the deadbolts. But living on a rural Texas ranch teaches you a profound level of self-reliance. I walked into the kitchen, opened the utility drawer, and pulled out a heavy steel crowbar. I wedged the flattened end under the edge of the plywood, covering the side patio door, and leaned my entire weight into the iron bar. The wood splintered. The nails shrieked against the doorframe. With one final forceful heave, the barrier broke away, letting the humid morning air rush into the stagnant kitchen. I stepped out onto the patio. The landscape looked like a war zone. Ancient oak trees lay splintered across the gravel driveway. The metal fencing near the pastures bent at unnatural angles. Despite the external ruin, the house stood tall and defiant. I walked around the perimeter to the heavy gray utility box where Donovan had cut the main power. He had secured the panel with a thick steel padlock, pocketing the key before he fled to Austin. I went to the barn, retrieved a pair of industrial bolt cutters, and returned to the panel. The steel jaws snapped through the padlock with a sharp crack. I swung the metal door open and pulled the heavy transfer switch, disconnecting the house from the dead municipal grid. I rolled my heavy-duty portable generator out of the garage, connected the thick black output cable to the exterior outlet, and pulled the starter cord. The engine roared to life, a loud and steady thrum of internal combustion. I walked back to the utility box and flipped the main breaker. Inside the house, the refrigerator hummed back to life. The ceiling fans began a slow, steady rotation. The lights I had left, switched on the previous afternoon, illuminated the living room. I stood on the porch and let out a long, shuddering breath. Flipping that breaker was not just about restoring electricity. It was about taking back my domain. My father had tried to render me powerless in every possible sense of the word. He wanted me sitting in the dark, waiting for destruction. By firing up that generator, I was sending a silent declaration. I was still here. I was in control. I went back inside and plugged my dead phone into the kitchen island outlet. The screen remained black for a few tense minutes before the battery icon appeared, followed by the glowing startup logo. The moment the operating system booted, the device vibrated continuously in my palm. The notifications flooded the screen in rapid succession. I watched the numbers climb. 5 missed calls, 12 missed calls, 27 missed calls in total. A tight knot formed in my chest. For a brief, fleeting second, a wave of guilt washed over me. I assumed my parents had spent the entire night panicked watching the Weather Channel in their luxury Austin hotel suite, terrified that the storm had swallowed their daughter. I assumed the relentless calling was a desperate attempt to hear my voice and confirm I had survived the night. I tapped the voicemail icon. There was only one audio message. It was from my mother, Nancy. I pressed play and activated the speakerphone, setting the device on the granite countertop. Nancy spent her entire life curating a flawless social image. She thrived at country club luncheons, carried designer handbags, and hosted charitable galas where she donated other people's money. She viewed my veterinary career as a dirty, embarrassing hobby. She treated conversation as a strict transaction, never speaking without a specific demand. The voicemail did not start with a frantic plea. It started with an annoyed sigh. Paula, her voice clipped and sharp through the tiny speaker. "The Austin roads are clear. We have been trying to reach you all morning. Did the roof cave in? Send pictures of the water damage immediately. Donovan is on the phone with the agent right now. We need to file the claim before the adjusters get overwhelmed. Call me back and send the photos." The audio feed clicked and ended. The silence in the kitchen felt heavier than the hurricane. I stared at the phone. I played the message a second time, listening closely to the background noise. I could hear the faint clinking of silverware on porcelain, the soft murmur of a television tuned to a morning news broadcast. They were eating room service breakfast. They were safe, dry, and entirely unbothered. Not once did she ask if I was hurt. Not once did she ask if I was safe. "Are you alive? Are the animals okay? Did you have enough food?" None of those questions crossed her mind. She only wanted photographic proof of the destruction. I looked up from the phone and surveyed my surroundings. The dry hardwood floors, the intact ceiling, the secure walls. The house was not ruined. The realization hit me like a physical blow, cold and sharp. They did not just hope for a little insurance money to cover some missing shingles. They wanted a catastrophic structural failure. They needed a total loss. Leaving me locked inside the dark house was not an oversight. It was a calculated maneuver to ensure nobody could intervene if the property began to flood or tear apart. I was nothing more than an inconvenient squatter standing in the way of a lucrative payout. I did not shed a tear. Crying requires a level of emotional vulnerability my parents did not deserve. Instead, a profound, chilling clarity washed over me. I picked up the phone. I opened the message thread with my mother. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have typed a furious response. I could have sent a picture of the perfectly dry living room to ruin their morning. Instead, I locked the screen and slid the device into my back pocket. I walked over to the coffee maker, poured fresh water into the reservoir, and hit the brew button. I weaponized my silence. Let them sit in their expensive Austin hotel room and sweat. Let them wonder why the insurance claim they were so eager to file lacked any photographic evidence. I knew my refusal to answer would drive Donovan into a frantic rage. He needed the narrative of a destroyed coastal property to solve whatever financial crisis he was hiding. By holding back the truth of my survival, I was drawing him out. The storm outside had passed, but the real disaster was just beginning. My father would eventually have to drive back to the coast to inspect his ruined investment, and when he finally arrived at those front gates, he was going to find his daughter waiting for him, fully prepared for a war he did not realize he had started. The silence from my end lasted exactly 4 hours. I spent that time tending to the animals, inspecting the perimeter fencing, and clearing the heavy debris from the front driveway. I needed the physical labor. It kept my mind sharp and my adrenaline leveled. By noon, the sky had cleared into a brilliant, deceptive blue, common after a major hurricane strips the atmosphere. My phone, resting on the kitchen counter, began to vibrate again. This time, it was not Nancy. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I dried my hands on a dish towel, picked up the device, and hit accept. Paula Donovan barked, skipping any pretense of a greeting. "Where have you been? We have been trying to reach you since dawn." "I am here," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "The house is fine. We are all fine." There was a heavy pause on the line. It was not the sigh of a relieved parent. It was the sharp intake of breath from a man whose calculations had just failed. Fine. He repeated the word, sounding like gravel in his throat. What do you mean, fine? Did the roof hold? Did the water breach the ground floor? A few inches under the sunroom doors, I replied. The roof is intact. The structure is sound. You do not need to worry about the drywall. Another pause. This one longer, tighter. I could picture him standing by a large window in a high-rise hotel, his jaw working as he tried to process the survival of the property. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its authoritative edge and gained a frantic, desperate cadence. Listen to me very carefully, he commanded. You need to pack up those dogs and get out of there. Today. The roads are clearing up. I want you off the property by sunset. I leaned against the granite countertop, tracing the veining in the stone with my index finger. Off the property? Why would I do that? The storm has passed. Because we need the space, Paula. Donovan snapped, his temper fraying. Our place in Galveston is gone. The surge took the entire lower level and gutted the interior. The building manager just called. It is uninhabitable. We have nowhere else to go. We are moving into the ranch until we figure out our next move. Get your things out. The Galveston property. A sprawling, ultra-modern condominium right on the seawall. It was Nancy's pride and joy, a status symbol they used to entertain clients and host weekend cocktail parties. They treated that condo like a primary residence, despite spending most of their time in Houston. The ranch, my home, was just a backup asset to them, an outdated piece of real estate they only visited when they wanted to complain about the upkeep. Now their pristine oceanfront investment was a pile of ruined drywall and shattered glass, and they expected me to simply step aside and hand over my sanctuary. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the absurdity of his demand settle over me. I thought about the previous night, the suffocating darkness, the screaming wind, the physical agony of hauling terrified animals up the stairs while wondering if the roof would tear off. My father had left me to die in a Category 4 hurricane to collect an insurance check, and now he wanted me to vacate the premises so he could sleep comfortably. You cannot move in, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any anger or panic. What did you just say to me? Donovan demanded. You cannot move in, I repeated. This is not your house. The silence that followed was different this time. It was the stunned silence of a man who had never been told no by his daughter. I let my mind drift back 3 years. I was 25, sitting on the wraparound porch with my grandfather, Arthur. He was a quiet, weathered man who built his fortune in Texas oil, but preferred the solitude of the coastal plains. He understood the intrinsic value of land, not just its market price. His health was failing, and the oxygen tank beside his rocking chair hummed a steady rhythm. Arthur reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He handed it to me, his hands trembling slightly, the skin thin and translucent like parchment paper. I am leaving this land to you, Paula, he said, his voice raspy but firm. Not the money, not the stocks, just this dirt and the wood standing on it. I tried to hand it back, confused. Grandpa, Dad handles the estate. He is going to be furious. Arthur placed a heavy, calloused hand over mine, forcing me to keep the envelope. Let him be furious. Your father sees a house, Paula. You see a home. Donovan measures everything by what it can be sold for. If I leave this place to him, he will pave it over for a subdivision before my headstone is carved. Do not let him sell the dirt out from under you. It is yours. Protect it. I opened the envelope that afternoon. Inside was the original notarized deed transferring the coastal ranch directly into my name, bypassing my father entirely. Donovan had spent the last 3 years pretending to manage the property, paying the property taxes from a joint trust account to maintain the illusion of control. He acted like the landlord, treating me like a difficult tenant he tolerated out of familial obligation. But legally, on paper, recorded in the county courthouse, I owned every single blade of grass. Paula Donovan's voice dragged me back to the present, harsh and demanding through the phone speaker. Do not play games with me today. I am not in the mood. I pay the taxes. I maintain the insurance. It is my property. You are going to pack your bags and leave, or I will drive down there and physically remove you myself. He was bluffing, trying to reassert his dominance through sheer volume, but his panic was palpable. If the Galveston condo was destroyed, he was suddenly facing a massive financial void. He needed the ranch, not just for shelter, but probably for leverage. You do not own this property, Donovan, I said, using his first name for the first time in my life. Grandpa left it to me. The deed is in my name. I am standing in my kitchen in my house, and you are not welcome here. Are you out of your mind? He yelled, the sound distorting the small speaker. I have the paperwork in my briefcase. I have the equity documents. I have the insurance policies. You think a piece of paper Arthur signed years ago means anything? I control the assets. I control the trust. He was grasping at straws, trying to confuse me with financial jargon. But I remembered the sleek, locked leather briefcase he had packed so carefully before the storm. I have the equity papers, that is all that matters. He had said those words on the porch. He believed whatever was in that briefcase superseded my grandfather's wishes. If you are so confident, I said, my pulse finally beginning to race, then come down here and prove it. But bring a locksmith, because I changed the deadbolts this morning. I ended the call before he could respond. I did not wait for the inevitable explosion of rage. I set the phone face down on the counter. The confrontation was set. Donovan would not stay in Austin. His pride and his desperation would not allow it. He was going to drive straight into the disaster zone to confront me. I walked into the living room, retrieved the manila envelope from the hidden compartment in the antique roll-top desk, and placed the original deed on the dining room table. I was not a squatter, and I was no longer a compliant daughter. I was the homeowner, and I was going to force my father to reveal exactly what he had hidden inside that locked leather briefcase. The midday sun baked the moisture out of the soaked earth, wrapping the coastal ranch in a thick, suffocating blanket of humidity. I stood in the kitchen and drank black coffee while I waited. The heavy stillness of the post-hurricane afternoon settled over the property. My phone rested in my pocket, fully charged. The new deadbolts felt solid under my fingertips. I had driven my truck into town hours ago, navigating around downed pine trees and flooded intersections, just to buy heavy-duty locks from the only hardware store running on a backup generator. By 3 o'clock, the familiar crunch of tires on wet gravel broke the silence. A dark gray utility van pulled up to the front gate, followed closely by a rented sedan. Donovan stepped out of the driver's seat of the sedan. His khaki slacks were wrinkled. His pristine polo shirt clung to his shoulders, stained with sweat and anxiety. He looked nothing like the polished, calculating executive who had abandoned me in the dark yesterday. Beside him walked a man in faded work clothes carrying a heavy canvas tool bag, the hired locksmith. Donovan pointed toward the front porch, barking orders with sharp, frantic gestures. The locksmith looked uneasy, glancing at the fallen branches in the yard and the intact roof above my head. I stepped out the front door, pulling the heavy security screen shut between us. I slid the thick steel deadbolt into place with a loud, defining click. Inside the hallway, Buster let out a low, warning growl, sensing the hostility radiating from the porch. Donovan marched up the wooden steps, His face flushed a deep, mottled red. "Open this door right now," he demanded, rattling the metal handle. I stood my ground. My breathing remained slow, measured. I held the manila envelope containing the original notarized deed against my chest. The locksmith dropped his canvas bag onto the porch boards and pulled out a heavy, cordless drill. "Stop right there," I told the stranger, my voice projecting clearly through the wire mesh. "You drill into that lock, and I will have the county sheriff arrest you for breaking and entering. This is my private property." The locksmith froze, his finger hovering over the trigger. He looked at Donovan, then back at me. "Sir, you said you owned this place," the man muttered, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I do own it," Donovan shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "She is my daughter. She is having a mental breakdown. Drill the lock and get this door open." I pulled the crisp, aged paper from the envelope and pressed it flat against the reinforced mesh of the screen door. Read the name on the grant deed, I instructed the locksmith. The man leaned in, squinting through the wire. He saw the county seal. He saw the official stamps. He saw my name printed in bold black ink. "I am sorry, buddy," the locksmith said, taking a step back and shoving his drill into his canvas bag. "I do not get involved in family disputes, and I definitely do not mess with legal titles. I am out of here." Donovan grabbed the man by the shoulder, demanding he stay, offering him double his rate. The locksmith shook him off in disgust and hurried back to his van. The engine roared to life, and the van sped down the driveway, kicking up a spray of wet gravel. My father was left alone on the porch. The polished facade he wore for the world finally crumbled. He slammed his fists against the metal screen. The sudden noise echoed across the empty pastures, sending a flock of crows into the sky. "You think that piece of paper matters?" he sneered, his breath fogging the wire mesh. "You think a sentimental gift from a senile old man means you hold the power here? You are nothing but a vet tech playing house." "It means I hold the title," I replied softly. I slipped my hand into my back pocket. My thumb found the screen of my phone. I blindly tapped the icon, activating the voice memo application. The red timer began to count the seconds. Donovan let out a bitter, echoing laugh, a laugh born of pure arrogance and mounting panic. "You hold nothing, Paula. I fixed that problem months ago. Did you really believe I would let prime real estate sit idle while you run a glorified petting zoo for stray dogs? I am a businessman. I leverage assets." I kept my expression blank, encouraging him to fill the silence. "What did you do, Donovan?" He leaned closer, his eyes wild, venomous. "I filed a quitclaim deed. I transferred the title of this ranch to a corporate holding company under my name." "You cannot do that without my signature," I said, keeping my tone perfectly even, projecting calm confusion to draw him deeper into his own trap. "I do not need your signature when I have a notary who understands how the real world works," he boasted, his chest puffing out with misplaced pride. A contact from the country club stamped the paperwork for a $5,000 consulting fee. The county clerk filed it without a second glance. "On paper, you do not exist. That holding company owns this ranch now." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. A fraudulent deed, a bribed official. The scope of his betrayal stretched far beyond simple neglect. He had not just abandoned me to the storm. He had stolen the ground beneath my feet months before the first rain cloud formed. "Why would you risk a felony just to put the house in a shell company?" I asked, needing him to state his motive out loud. "Because Cameron needed cash." Donovan spat the truth, finally boiling over. "Your brother has a business to run. He is building the future. His tech startup hit a rough patch and the investors were getting restless. I took out a second mortgage on this land to fund his operations. I leveraged the equity to save his reputation, and when the storm trajectory shifted toward the coast this week, I saw an opportunity. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead, his breathing ragged. I took out a premium hurricane insurance policy under the holding company. I needed the roof to fail. I needed the structural damage. The payout would cover the illegal mortgage before the bank ever decided to audit the LLC. You were supposed to just sit in the dark and let the wind do the work. He stood there panting, the humid air clinging to his skin. He had confessed to mortgage fraud, insurance fraud, and bribery, all to protect the illusion of my brother's success. He risked my life to secure a payout for a son who had never worked a hard day in his life. Cameron had always been the golden child, the brilliant innovator destined for greatness, while I was dismissed as the unpolished daughter sweeping dog hair off clinic floors. I looked at the man who raised me. I saw no remorse. I saw only the frantic anger of a criminal whose scheme had been thwarted by a resilient roof and a stubborn daughter. I slowly pulled my phone from my back pocket and held it up to the screen door. The bright red recording graphic pulsed rhythmically on the display. "Thank you for clarifying the timeline," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I will be sure to share that exact sequence of events with the insurance adjusters and the county fraud investigator." Donovan stared at the digital timer on the screen. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale sheen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by raw, primal fear. "Get off my porch!" I commanded. He stumbled backward down the wooden steps, his eyes locked on the recording device in my hand. He retreated to his rented sedan, threw himself into the driver's seat, and sped toward the main road. I stopped the recording and saved the audio file to 3 separate secure cloud servers. The physical threat was gone for the moment, but the war was far from over. Donovan had leveraged my home to save his favorite child. And if my father was this desperate, I knew it was only a matter of time before Cameron himself showed up at my gates, expecting me to sacrifice my life for his failures. The late afternoon sun turned the Texas Gulf Coast into a suffocating greenhouse. Moisture evaporated from the soaked earth, creating a thick haze that blurred the tree line. I stood near the western fence, using heavy leather gloves to drag splintered pine branches away from the pasture gates. The physical exhaustion kept my mind sharp. Donovan had retreated, but men who build their entire identities on control do not surrender after a single defeat. They regroup. They send reinforcements. The low, powerful rumble of a high-performance engine broke the rural silence. A matte black luxury SUV navigated the flooded potholes of the main road and turned onto my gravel driveway. The vehicle looked absurd against the backdrop of snapped trees and scattered roofing shingles. It was a machine built for pristine urban pavement, not hurricane aftermath. The engine cut off and the heavy driver door swung open. My older brother Cameron stepped into the humid air. He was 30 years old, dressed in tailored dark denim and a crisp linen shirt that belonged in a high-end Austin cocktail lounge. His hair was perfectly styled, unaffected by the oppressive humidity. He looked down at the ground, his expression twisting in disgust. His foot, clad in a pristine, bright white designer sneaker, hovered over a patch of thick coastal mud. He stepped carefully, trying to preserve his immaculate appearance. A jagged piece of torn aluminum siding lay in his path, a remnant of the storm that had nearly taken my life 12 hours earlier. Cameron did not step around it. He casually kicked the debris out of his way, sending it skidding into a puddle. He treated the wreckage of my survival like an annoying inconvenience, interrupting his busy schedule. I leaned against the wooden fence post, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist, and waited for him to speak. Cameron always played the diplomat. While Donovan used intimidation to get his way, Cameron preferred charm manipulation and guilt. He was the golden child, the brilliant prodigy. From the time we were children, the family resources flowed exclusively in his direction. Private coding academies, Ivy League tuition, and the initial seed money for his tech ventures all came from our parents' deep pockets. I paid my own way through a state veterinary program by waiting tables and working overnight kennel shifts. My achievements were met with indifferent nods. His minor milestones resulted in expensive celebratory dinners. "Paula," he said, flashing a bright, practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. "Look at this mess. I am just glad you were safe. Dad called me in a panic. He said you two had a misunderstanding." I stared at his spotless white sneakers. "A misunderstanding," I repeated, my voice devoid of emotion. "He locked me in a dark house with the power cut and the roof supports deliberately compromised during a Category 4 hurricane. Which part of that was a misunderstanding?" Cameron waved a hand in the air, dismissing my words as if I were being dramatic. "You know how Dad gets under pressure. He was trying to protect the assets. He thought the upstairs would hold. He just did not communicate his plan very well. You are acting like he tried to hurt you on purpose. He is terrified right now, Paula. You really shook him up with all that talk about county fraud investigators." He took a few steps closer, leaning against the top rail of the fence. He tried to look casual, but I noticed the subtle tension in his jaw, the frantic tapping of his index finger against the wood. "Let us just reset." Cameron offered adopting his best boardroom negotiation voice. "Dad made a mistake. He admits that. But holding this property hostage over a piece of paper Arthur signed years ago is not going to fix anything. We need to handle this as a family. Just sign the transfer forms, release the deed to the holding company, and I will personally make sure you get a generous cut of the insurance payout. You can buy a nice little clinic somewhere inland, away from all these storms." I crossed my arms over my chest. "Why do you care, Cameron? You have not visited this ranch in 4 years. Why drive all the way from Austin just to play mediator for a piece of real estate you despise?" His polished smile faltered. The charming facade cracked, revealing the raw, desperate panic hiding underneath. He looked around the empty pastures, ensuring no one else was listening, before lowering his voice. "Because my company is insolvent, Paula." The confession hung in the heavy, humid air. Cameron was the founder of a highly publicized software startup. He had graced the covers of regional business magazines hailed as a visionary. His entire identity rested on the illusion of immense wealth and effortless success. "The investors pulled their funding last quarter," he continued, the words spilling out in a rushed, bitter stream. "The proprietary algorithm we promised does not work. The beta tests failed. We are burning through cash just to keep the servers running, and the board of directors is threatening to force a liquidation. I am drowning." I looked at him, feeling a strange sense of detachment. "And Dad used the ranch to bail you out?" "Yes," Cameron hissed, stepping closer. "He used his country club connections to set up that holding company. He forged the quitclaim deed so he could leverage this land. He took out a massive commercial loan against the property equity and funneled the cash directly into my startup to keep the board quiet. It was a bridge loan, a temporary fix until we secured our next round of venture capital." The pieces fell into place with chilling precision. The fake title, the desperate need for a hurricane payout. My father had not just risked my life for a standard insurance scam. He had orchestrated a complex web of financial felonies to prevent his golden child from facing public failure. "If you contest that deed," Cameron said, his tone shifting from pleading to demanding, "the bank will freeze the holding company accounts. They will launch a full audit. They will see the forged notary stamp. The commercial lender will realize the collateral is invalid, and they will demand immediate repayment of the startup loan. My company will fold overnight. The SEC will investigate the wire transfers. Dad will go to federal prison for mortgage fraud, and I will be indicted for defrauding my investors. He stared at me, his chest heaving. He expected me to gasp. He expected me to crumble under the weight of family loyalty. He expected me to sacrifice my home, my security, and my grandfather's legacy to protect him from the consequences of his own incompetence. You built a house of cards, I said, keeping my voice low and steady. And you expect me to let you burn my house down to keep yours warm. We are family, he snapped, his face flushing red. You owe us. What are you doing with your life anyway? You play with stray dogs in the mud. I am building the future. I employ hundreds of people. I have a reputation to protect. You are being selfish. Just sign the damn papers and let the insurance handle the rest. The sheer audacity of his entitlement washed over me. He stood on the land I had spent the last 12 hours fighting to save, wearing shoes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and called me selfish. He felt nothing for the terror I endured. He only felt the sting of his own impending ruin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, bringing up the audio file I had recorded during my conversation with Donovan. I did not press play. I simply held the device up so Cameron could see the glowing file name. Dad already confessed to the forgery on tape, I told him, watching the color drain from his face. I have the original deed. I have high-definition trail camera footage proving he intentionally sabotaged the roof supports before locking me inside. Cameron stared at the digital screen, his eyes widening in horror. You recorded him. I am not signing anything. I said, my voice hardening into steel. I am not bailing you out. Your startup is going to fail, Cameron. The bank is going to find out about the loan, and if either of you ever step foot on my property again, I will send this entire folder directly to the county district attorney. You cannot do this, he stammered, taking a step back, the panic finally breaking through his arrogant exterior. You will destroy the family. The family destroyed itself the moment Dad cut the power switch, I replied. Get off my land. Cameron stood frozen for a long second. The realization that his charm, his guilt trips, and his demands held zero power over me finally took root. His expression morphed into something ugly, twisted with spite. He turned on his heel, his pristine sneakers slipping in the mud, and stormed back to his luxury SUV. He ripped the driver door open and paused, looking back at me over his shoulder. You think you won because you have a recording, he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. You have no idea what Mom and Dad are capable of when they are backed into a corner. We are not just going to walk away and let you ruin us. You are going to regret this, Paula. We will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. He climbed into the vehicle, slammed the door, and accelerated hard. The heavy tires spun in the wet gravel, kicking a shower of stones against the wooden fence before the SUV careened down the main road, disappearing into the humid haze. I watched the dust settle. Cameron's parting threat was not an empty promise. They had failed to physically intimidate me. They had failed to manipulate me. That left only one avenue of attack. They were going to try to destroy my reputation. I walked back toward the house, my mind already calculating their next move, knowing the real war was about to begin in the court of public opinion. The morning air hung stagnant and heavy, smelling of crushed pine needles and standing water. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, vibrating so hard it inched toward the edge of the polished wood. I picked it up. Dozens of notifications clogged the lock screen, all originating from the local coastal community's social media pages. Cameron had promised they would make everyone know who I was. Nancy had executed the threat with surgical precision. My mother possessed a unique talent for weaponizing pity. At her various country club luncheons, she was the undisputed master of the subtle sigh, the lingering glance downward, the delicate dab of a tissue against dry eyes. She knew exactly how to perform vulnerability to manipulate an audience. She treated public sympathy like a currency, and she was about to spend all of it to bankrupt my reputation. I opened the application. There it was, pinned to the very top of the County Storm Recovery Group, a long, emotionally charged paragraph accompanied by a carefully cropped photograph. The picture showed Donovan standing at my front gate yesterday afternoon. The angle was clever, intentionally deceptive. It cut out the hired locksmith and the heavy-duty power drill. It only showed a weary, disheveled older man leaning against the iron bars, looking defeated and locked out. The caption read like a tragic Southern novel. My mother wrote that they had lost their Galveston home to the storm surge. That specific part was true. Everything else was a calculated fabrication. She claimed they drove through the dangerous flooded wreckage to seek shelter at their own coastal ranch, only to find their estranged daughter squatting inside. She wrote that I had suffered a mental break during the hurricane, that I changed all the locks, and that I flatly refused to let my elderly homeless parents inside during a state of emergency. She begged the tight-knit community for advice. She asked for prayers. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. People in the Gulf Coast region were already running on raw nerves. They were exhausted, hot, and grieving their own property losses. Nancy handed them a highly convenient villain to focus their generalized anger upon. I scrolled through the comments watching the digital mob out for blood. Strangers called me a monster. They tagged the local sheriff department demanding an eviction. They shared my exact home address, mapping out the routes that were clear of fallen trees. One user, a man whose profile picture showed him holding a hunting rifle, suggested they come down to the ranch and force the gates open themselves to help the poor, displaced seniors reclaim their sanctuary. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen. The urge to defend myself flared hot and tight in my chest. I could post the audio recording. I could expose the fake deed and the insurance scam right there in the comments section for the entire county to hear. I wanted to scream the truth. But engaging with a digital mob is like throwing a cup of water on a grease fire. It only feeds the destruction and spreads the flames. A loud, sustained car horn shattered the morning quiet, echoing across the front pasture. I walked to the front window and peered through the narrow slats of the wooden blinds. A rusted pickup truck idled just outside my perimeter fence. Two men I did not recognize stood by the lowered tailgate staring up at the house. One of them picked up an empty glass bottle and hurled it over the iron gate. It shattered on the wet gravel driveway, sending Buster and the other rescue dogs into a frenzy of barking from the interior hallway. The men were shouting through the thick walls of the ranch, muffled their exact words. Their tense, hostile body language told the entire story. They had seen the post. They felt righteous in their anger. They wanted to deliver their own brand of backwoods justice to the terrible daughter who locked out her freezing parents. My parents had successfully turned the community against me. They expected me to panic. They wanted me to feel isolated, terrified, and despised by my own neighbors. They assumed the crushing pressure of public hatred would force me to open the gates and surrender the property just to make the harassment stop. I turned away from the window, walked into the kitchen, and pulled my laptop from my waterproof go bag. I set the computer on the granite island, poured a cup of cold coffee from the pot I brewed yesterday, and flipped the screen open. If they wanted to play a high-stakes game of reputations, I needed to ensure I kept score permanently. I opened a new digital folder on my desktop and named it Defamation. I pulled up the social media groups on the widescreen. I did not type a single word in my defense. I simply pressed the screenshot keys, capturing the evidence with cold, methodical precision. Click. Nancy's original post capturing the exact time, date, and URL address to preserve the digital chain of custody. Click. The cropped, deceptive photograph of Donovan clinging to the gate. Click. Every single comment threatening physical harm or property damage. I expanded the nest of replies, ensuring the username's timestamps and profile pictures were clearly visible in the captured images. For 3 hours, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen sipping bitter coffee while the digital attacks multiplied by the minute. The car horn outside honked intermittently, a jagged disruption to the rural silence. At one point, a second vehicle arrived, a dark sedan pulling up onto the soft shoulder of the road. I heard the distinct heavy rattle of someone shaking the iron gates, testing the thick chain and the new padlock I had installed before dawn. They rattled the metal. I archived another documented threat. My mother thought she was launching a brilliant public relations campaign. She did not realize she was handing me a meticulously documented paper trail of libel, slander, and incitement. Every time she replied to a sympathetic comment with another tearful, fabricated lie, she added another layer of severe legal liability to her eventual ruin. The psychology of my mother always fascinated me in a morbid, detached way. She spent her entire adult life curating a pristine public image. She firmly believed perception was reality. If she could convince the wealthy ladies at the country club that she was a victim, then she believed she truly was one. She never stopped to consider the tangible real-world consequences of her digital theatrics. She thought the internet was just another country club luncheon, a place to gossip and gather sympathy without facing any legal repercussions. By noon, the folder on my desktop contained over 200 high-resolution images. I backed the critical files up to 2 separate secure cloud drives and copied them onto a portable flash drive. The noise outside escalated again. A third vehicle joined the impromptu blockade at my front gate. The shouting grew noticeably louder, carrying over the wind. A heavy rock thudded against the wooden siding of the barn, causing the horses in the far pasture to whinny in distress. My rescue dogs paced the interior of the house, feeding off the hostile electric energy radiating from the road. I could not keep the animals trapped inside these rooms indefinitely, and I could not safely walk them in the pastures while an angry mob gathered at the perimeter line. The social warfare was achieving its intended effect. The ranch was rapidly becoming a prison. I closed the laptop and placed it back into my bag. I had the physical evidence of my parents' calculated sabotage. I had the clear audio confession of the fraudulent deed. I had the raw trail camera footage of the deliberate roof damage. Now, I possessed an exhaustive, time-stamped record of a coordinated public smear campaign designed to incite violence and harassment. But holding the evidence was not enough to win. I was a veterinary technician, not a litigator. I knew how to splint a broken leg and administer vaccines, but I did not know how to dismantle a fraudulent corporate holding company or file a civil injunction against my own family. If I stayed here, hiding behind locked doors while the mob outside grew bolder, Donovan and Nancy would eventually find a way to breach the physical defenses. They had the financial resources to hire more locksmiths, more lawyers, and more people willing to look the other way for a generous payday. I could not win a defensive war of attrition. I needed to go on the offensive. I walked to the hall closet and pulled out a heavy denim jacket. I clipped the keys to my heavy-duty truck onto my belt loop. I loaded the dogs back into their secure travel crates with fresh water and extra food, ensuring they were safe in the windowless interior rooms, far away from the exterior walls and the shouting strangers. I was not going to sit at the kitchen table and wait for the iron gate to break. I was going to drive straight through the gathering crowd. I was heading to Houston. The sprawling metropolis was filled with sharp, ruthless professionals who thrived on dismantling complex corporate fraud and punishing illegal real estate maneuvers. My father thought he was the only member of the MacDonald family who knew how to leverage connections and deploy terrifying legal threats. He was about to learn that his isolated, underestimated daughter had been paying very close attention to his methods for years. I grabbed the flash drive, slipped it deep into my pocket, and headed out the back door toward the garage, ready to secure the one thing my father feared more than a Category 4 hurricane: a lawyer who could not be bought. The heavy tires of my truck gripped the wet asphalt as I pulled out of the rear service gate, leaving the angry shouts of the local mob fading in the rearview mirror. I drove north, navigating the fractured coastal highways toward Houston. The landscape shifted slowly outside my window, transitioning from splintered pine trees and flooded ditches to the towering glass and steel fortresses of the downtown financial district. The oppressive humidity of the coast gave way to the sharp, sterile chill of central air conditioning as I stepped into the gleaming lobby of one of the most ruthless property litigation firms in the state. I did not need a family mediator. I needed a mercenary. Mitchell possessed the cold, calculating demeanor of a man who spent his entire career dissecting lies. He did not handle divorces or petty civil disputes. His specialty was corporate real estate fraud, untangling complex webs of shell companies and illegal encumbrances. He sat behind a sprawling mahogany desk on the 42nd floor, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that projected effortless authority. His office smelled of expensive leather and lemon polish, a stark contrast to the scent of wet earth and ozone I carried in on my boots. I sat in the plush leather chair opposite his desk and unzipped my waterproof bag. I placed the aged manila envelope on the polished wood, followed by the small silver flash drive. Mitchell did not offer a warm greeting or a sympathetic smile. He clasped his hands together and leaned forward, his sharp brown eyes assessing my mud-caked jeans and tired posture. He recognized a client standing on the edge of a precipice. "Tell me why you are sitting in my office instead of clearing debris off your property," Mitchell instructed, his voice low and precise. I slid the manila envelope across the desk. "I am the sole legal owner of a coastal ranch in the blast zone of the recent hurricane. My father used a bribed notary to file a forged quitclaim deed, transferring my title to a holding company he controls. He used that fake title to secure a commercial loan for my brother, and he took out a premium hurricane insurance policy on the property." Mitchell raised an eyebrow, reaching for the envelope. He pulled out the original notarized grant deed my grandfather had given me. His eyes scanned the document, registering the county seals and the distinct verified signatures. "Mortgage fraud and title theft," Mitchell noted, setting the paper down. "A bold strategy, but unfortunately common in high-value real estate families." Why the urgency today? Because he needed the insurance money to pay back the commercial loan before the bank audited his holding company, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly even. He needed a total loss. So he left the upper roof trusses unclamped, cut the main power breaker, locked me inside the house, and drove to Austin 12 hours before the Category 4 storm made landfall. Mitchell stopped moving. The rhythmic tapping of his expensive pen against the legal pad ceased. For a long, tense moment, the only sound in the office was the faint hum of the ventilation system. He looked at me, searching my face for any sign of hyperbole or hysteria. He found nothing but cold, hardened resolve. "Plug in the flash drive," I said softly. Mitchell picked up the silver drive and inserted it into his sleek desktop computer. I directed him to the audio file first. The crisp digital recording filled the quiet office. Donovan's voice echoed through the room, boasting about the country club notary, the $5,000 bribe, and his deliberate plan to let the wind tear the roof apart. Mitchell listened with intense focus, his jaw tightening as the confession played out. Then I had him open the video files. The high-definition night vision footage from my trail cameras showed the shingles peeling back, the structural framing shaking, and the distinct lack of safety clamps my father claimed he had installed. A hardened litigator who spent his days destroying corrupt executives and exposing white-collar criminals sat in stunned silence. Mitchell dealt with financial ruin daily. He was accustomed to greed, but the calculated, physical endangerment of a daughter for a payout crossed a threshold he rarely witnessed. "Your father did not just commit real estate fraud," Mitchell stated, his voice stripped of its usual corporate detachment. "He engineered a death trap to cover his tracks." "He underestimated the house," I replied, meeting his gaze. "And he underestimated me." "Can you freeze the insurance claim and the title transfer?" Mitchell did not answer immediately. He turned to his keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys with practiced speed. He logged into the restricted county property database, utilizing his firm credentials to bypass the public-facing portals. The dual monitors on his desk reflected in his glasses as he pulled up the exact coordinates of my coastal ranch. "Let us see exactly how deep this rot goes," he murmured. Lines of complex legal and financial data scrolled across the screen. Mitchell read through the digital ledgers, his eyes darting back and forth. He found the shell corporation Donovan created. He located the fraudulent quitclaim deed. He clicked on the scanned image of the notary stamp. "Here is the fatal flaw," Mitchell said, pointing to the screen. "Your father used a notary named Richard Vance. I know Richard. He is a disgraced former loan officer who caters to the desperate members of that specific country club. But your father made a critical error in his rush to secure the capital. Richard notarized this document on a Tuesday in Houston. The geolocation data on your cell phone and your employment records from the veterinary clinic will prove you were working a double shift on the coast that entire day. You could not possibly have been in Houston to sign away your multi-million-dollar property. The timeline is physically impossible." Mitchell tapped another key, bringing up the financial liens attached to the fake holding company. "The depth of his desperation is staggering," Mitchell continued, a dark note of awe in his voice. "He did not just take out a small bridge loan. He leveraged 90% of the equity based on a fabricated appraisal. If the commercial lender discovers this title is contested, they will instantly trigger a default clause. They will freeze every liquid asset your father possesses to recoup their losses." "We need to stop the insurance payout before he can cover the gap," I said. "If he gets that check, he can pay off the loan and cover his tracks. He will drag this out in court for years while I fight a well-funded holding company." Mitchell hit a button on his desk phone, summoning a junior associate into the room. The young lawyer appeared within seconds, holding a legal pad. "Draft an emergency injunction," Mitchell ordered, his tone crisp and commanding. "I need a lis pendens filed on the coastal ranch property immediately, contesting the chain of title. Contact the commercial fraud division at the primary lender and inform them their collateral is currently under legal dispute. Then, draft a formal cease and desist order directed to the insurance carrier underwriting the hurricane policy. Inform them the claim filed by the holding company is under active investigation for felony insurance fraud. Move!" The associate nodded sharply and vanished behind the closing glass door. Mitchell turned back to me, leaning back in his leather chair. "We are severing his financial oxygen supply. By the end of business today, your father will not be able to withdraw a single dollar from his primary accounts. The insurance company will place a hard stop on his claim. The bank will demand an immediate review of the startup loan. We are going to bury him under his own paperwork." I felt a profound sense of vindication settling into my tired bones. The digital mob harassing me outside my gate felt trivial compared to the legal avalanche Mitchell was currently orchestrating. My mother could post all the tearful stories she wanted on social media. Likes and shares could not unfreeze a seized bank account. Just as I stood up to thank him, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting another automated notification from the neighborhood group. Instead, I saw a text message from a sympathetic neighbor who had not joined the angry crowd. She sent a screenshot of a new post Donovan had just made on his personal page. It was a photograph of my father, standing at a diner in the coastal town, holding a cup of coffee, looking smug and confident. The caption read, "Meeting the senior claims adjuster at the property in 2 hours, expecting a generous settlement to help us rebuild our lives after this tragic storm." My stomach dropped. Donovan was not waiting for the standard bureaucratic process. He had used his high-level corporate connections to bypass the usual queue and summon a senior adjuster directly to the ranch for an expedited on-site payout. If the adjuster approved the claim before Mitchell's injunction officially cleared the court system, Donovan would get a digital wire transfer. He would have the cash to escape the closing trap. I turned the screen around and showed the photograph to Mitchell. The ruthless attorney stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, fluid motion. He reached for his briefcase. "The injunction will take a few hours to process through the judge," Mitchell said, his eyes narrowing. "If that adjuster signs off on a total loss today, recovering the funds will require a federal lawsuit. We cannot let them complete that inspection without presenting our evidence on the ground." He looked at me, a fierce, predatory gleam in his eye. "How fast can that truck of yours get us back to the coast?" I gripped my keys tightly. "Fast enough?" We walked out of the towering corporate fortress together. The legal shield was forged, but the battle was shifting back to the mud and the debris of the ranch. Donovan thought he was walking into a routine insurance inspection to collect his stolen prize. He had no idea his daughter and a legal executioner were racing down the highway, bringing the undeniable truth right to his front door. The drive back to the coastal ranch took half the time it took to leave. The initial wave of evacuees had thinned, leaving the flooded highways mostly empty. Mitchell drove his imported sedan with aggressive precision, the tires cutting through standing water as we raced to the setting sun. My phone sat in the cup holder, acting as a real-time monitor for Donovan's hubris. He had posted another update in the community group. This one featured a wide shot of the ranch's front gate accompanied by the text, "The adjuster is almost here. Relief is on the way." He had no idea the relief he anticipated had already been legally strangled in a Houston high-rise. We turned onto the county road leading to the property. The scene outside the gates had shifted. The angry mob of neighbors had dispersed, likely heading home to assess their own storm damage as evening approached. In their place sat a sleek, dark blue SUV bearing the discreet logo of a major national insurance carrier. A man in a crisp white button-down and a heavy-duty windbreaker stood near the iron gates, holding a rugged digital tablet. This was Noah, the senior claims adjuster, and standing right next to him, gesturing wildly toward the distant roof of my house, was Donovan. My father wore fresh clothes. He looked re-energized, his posture straight, his chin lifted. He was performing for the adjuster, playing the role of the beleaguered patriarch who had lost a significant investment to the merciless weather. He pointed to the shattered dormer window and the missing shingles, his mouth moving in rapid, practiced explanations. He was laying the groundwork for a total loss classification. Mitchell pulled his sedan onto the soft shoulder of the road, parking directly behind the insurance vehicle. The sudden crunch of tires on gravel caught Donovan's attention. He stopped mid-sentence, his arm dropping to his side. His eyes locked onto my face through the passenger window, and the smug confidence vanished, replaced instantly by a flash of raw panic. He did not expect me back. He thought I was cowering inside, afraid of the mob. I stepped out of the car, slamming the door. Mitchell followed, his briefcase in hand, projecting an aura of calculated menace. Paula Donovan barked, stepping forward to intercept us, his voice strained. "I told you to stay inside. We are conducting official business here." I ignored him and walked straight toward the adjuster. Noah looked up from his tablet, evaluating the sudden tension. He was a seasoned professional, the kind of man who spent his life walking through disaster zones and spotting fraud. He possessed a calm, observational demeanor that made my father's frantic energy look even more suspicious. "Noah, I assume," I said, extending my hand. "I am Paula McDonald, the actual owner of this property." Noah shook my hand, his brow furrowing slightly. He glanced at Donovan, then back at me. "Mr. McDonald here claims to be the primary title holder through a corporate entity. He filed an expedited claim this morning." "I know what he filed," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Did he happen to mention why he requested the inspection out here today, rather than waiting for the standard queue?" "He cited severe structural damage and immediate displacement," Noah answered cautiously, tapping his stylus against the tablet screen. "And frankly, the posts I saw circulating on social media regarding a dispute on this property raised some red flags. We try to resolve contested claims quickly to prevent liability issues." Donovan laughed, a harsh, forced sound that lacked any real humor. "She is confused, Noah. My daughter has been under a lot of stress. She does not understand how the corporate trust is structured. The deed is fully recorded." Mitchell stepped forward, placing his briefcase on the hood of the insurance SUV. He snapped the latches open with a sharp, decisive click. "She understands the structure perfectly," Mr. McDonald, Mitchell said, his voice dropping into the resonant, commanding tone of a seasoned litigator. "The problem is that the structure is a criminal fabrication." Noah's eyes darted to Mitchell. "And you are?" "I am Mitchell Vance, legal counsel for Ms. McDonald. I represent the sole legal owner of this coastal ranch." Mitchell pulled a thick stack of papers from his briefcase and handed them directly to the adjuster. "What you are holding," Mitchell explained, pointing to the top document, "is an emergency lis pendens filed 2 hours ago in Harris County. It formally contests the chain of title for this property. Beneath that is the original notarized grant deed transferring the land directly to my client 3 years ago." Donovan lunged forward, reaching for the papers. "This is garbage!" he shouted, his face turning an angry mottled red. "You cannot just forge legal documents and hand them to an adjuster. I have the quitclaim deed. I have the holding company records." Mitchell smoothly blocked Donovan's reach, his expression hardening into concrete. "Do not touch my files," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. Noah stepped back, creating physical distance between himself and my father. He looked down at the documents in his hand, his trained eyes scanning the county seals and the signatures. He flipped to the second page, then the third. "There is a discrepancy here," Noah noted, his tone shifting from polite professional to guarded investigator. "The quitclaim deed Mr. McDonald submitted with his claim was notarized on a Tuesday in Houston." "Yes, it was," Donovan interjected, his breathing turning ragged. "It is perfectly legal." Mitchell pulled a second, thinner folder from his briefcase and handed it to Noah. "That folder contains my client's employment records and localized cellular data for that specific Tuesday," Mitchell said, delivering the fatal blow with surgical precision. Ms. McDonald was working a 16-hour double shift at a veterinary clinic 70 miles away. She physically could not have been in Houston to sign that document. The notary stamp is fraudulent. The title transfer is invalid, and by extension, the insurance policy your company issued to the holding company was secured under false pretenses. Noah stared at the timesheets and the data logs. He understood exactly what he was looking at. The realization settled over his features, hardening his expression. He looked up from the paperwork and stared directly at my father. "You filed a policy on a property you do not legally own," Noah stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I own the holding company," Donovan yelled, losing the last shreds of his composure. "The paperwork is processing. It is a technicality. You cannot void a claim over a clerical error. A forged notary signature transferring a multi-million-dollar asset is not a clerical error, Mr. McDonald." Noah countered, stepping toward his vehicle. "It is a felony." Donovan's hands curled into fists. "You are going to honor that claim. The roof is damaged. The structure is compromised. The storm hit the house. You owe the holding company that payout." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I queued up the video file. "The storm did not compromise the structure," I said, stepping closer to the adjuster. "He did." I hit play and handed the device to Noah. The high-definition trail camera footage played out on the small screen. It clearly showed Donovan on the roof the day before the storm, deliberately leaving the hurricane clips unfastened. It showed him pulling the main power breaker. It showed him locking the heavy padlock and taking the keys. Noah watched the entire sequence in silence. When the video ended, he handed the phone back to me. He did not say a word to Donovan. He picked up his digital tablet, opened the active claim file, and tapped the screen 3 times. "Claim voided," Noah announced the finality in his voice, ringing like a bell. "I am flagging this account for the Internal Fraud Division. We will be transferring all documentation to the State Insurance Commission. If I were you, Mr. McDonald, I would retain criminal defense counsel immediately." Noah climbed into his dark blue SUV, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The silence that followed was absolute. The humid coastal air felt thick enough to choke on. Donovan stood frozen, staring at the dust settling on the county road. His grand scheme, his carefully constructed safety net, had just vanished into thin air. He had no insurance payout. He had a fraudulent deed exposed. He had an angry commercial lender about to demand repayment for Cameron's failed startup. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide, vacant, processing the totality of his ruin. "You killed us," he whispered, the anger draining away, leaving only profound, hollow shock. "I did not kill anything," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of pity. "I just turned the lights back on." I turned my back on my father, walked past the iron gates, and headed up the gravel driveway toward my home. Mitchell fell into step beside me, his briefcase secured. We had won the battle at the gates, but the financial shockwave we just triggered was going to hit the rest of the family like a second hurricane. Cameron was next, and the federal government does not send polite adjusters to investigate wire fraud. They send agents. The tension in the room was palpable as Mitchell snapped his briefcase shut on the scarred oak dining table. The polished leather looked distinctly out of place next to a pile of muddy ropes and equine medical supplies. He did not ask for a drink. He did not sit down. He immediately opened his sleek laptop and connected to a secure firm network using a cellular hotspot. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the damaged pastures. The adjuster had driven away, but the legal machinery we set in motion was just beginning to grind its gears. Donovan was a desperate man, and desperate men run to their favored sons. I knew my father was sitting in his rented sedan somewhere on the shoulder of the highway, dialing Cameron in Austin. He would demand a rescue. He would demand capital to satisfy the commercial lender breathing down his neck. He did not realize he was asking a drowning man for a life raft. Mitchell's laptop emitted a sharp, specific chime. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes scanning the dense rows of text scrolling across his monitor. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Your brother just made a fatal miscalculation," Mitchell announced, his voice tight with anticipation. I stepped away from the kitchen sink and walked over to the table. "What did he do?" "He tried to wire $200,000 to your father's primary checking account," Mitchell explained, tapping the screen. "The problem is, Cameron initiated the transfer from a restricted corporate operating fund. He tried to disguise the routing numbers through a secondary vendor shell, but the banking algorithms caught the anomaly instantly." I leaned against the back of a wooden dining chair. He tried to embezzle his own investor capital. Mitchell nodded. When a high-profile tech startup hemorrhages cash and suddenly attempts to move 6 figures into a personal account connected to a contested real estate holding company, the system flags it as a priority suspicious activity report. The wire was frozen before it ever cleared the clearinghouse. But that is not the best part. Mitchell turned the laptop so I could see the screen. He pulled up an internal legal directory, cross-referencing the alert. The federal government does not issue instant asset freezes for a single erratic wire transfer. Mitchell continued, his tone dropping into a serious register. Unless they were already watching him. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been quietly building a file on your brother for months. His proprietary algorithm was a ghost. The beta tests were fabricated. The revenue he reported to his venture capitalists was just recycled seed money from new investors. A Ponzi scheme, I said, the gravity of the term settling over the room. He was running a digital Ponzi scheme. And he just handed the feds the smoking gun they needed to execute their warrants, Mitchell concluded, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. Turn on the local news. I walked into the living room and grabbed the television remote. The screen flickered to life, displaying a prominent Texas news network. The standard evening broadcast had been preempted by a breaking news banner glowing in stark red lettering across the bottom of the screen. The camera showed a live feed from downtown Austin. A sleek, towering glass building served as the backdrop. Men and women wearing dark windbreakers with bold yellow acronyms printed on the back walked in and out of the revolving doors. They carried heavy cardboard boxes filled with hard drives, physical ledgers, and server racks. The news anchor spoke with a practiced, urgent cadence. Federal agents have raided the headquarters of one of the most prominent tech startups in the state capital. Sources inside the Justice Department indicate the Chief Executive Officer, Cameron McDonald, is under active investigation for severe wire fraud and investor deception. A polished, professional headshot of my brother flashed onto the screen. His bright, confident smile looked almost mocking next to the footage of federal agents seizing his assets. The golden child, the brilliant innovator my parents sacrificed everything to protect, was being dismantled on live television for millions of viewers to witness. I felt a strange sense of equilibrium. For 3 decades, I had been the disappointment. I was the daughter who refused to wear the right clothes, attend the right galas, or pursue a lucrative corporate career. I chose dirt and animals over boardrooms and stock portfolios. My parents treated my life like a tragedy. Now, the son they worshipped was exposed as a hollow fraud paraded across the state as a criminal. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the local community social media groups. The digital landscape had shifted with whiplash-inducing speed. An hour ago, the county recovery page was a relentless stream of hatred directed at me. My mother's calculated sob story had weaponized the neighborhood. But the internet is a volatile, unpredictable arena. Someone in the group had seen the breaking news out of Austin. They cross-referenced the unusual last name, connected the dots to Donovan's prominent Houston business profile, and dropped a link to the federal raid directly into the comments section of Nancy's original post. The narrative inverted instantly. The neighbors who had hurled glass bottles at my gate were suddenly reading articles detailing how my father committed mortgage fraud and my brother operated a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. The sympathy my mother had carefully cultivated evaporated, replaced by intense, localized outrage. I watched the comment section update in real time. People began tearing apart her story. They pointed out the absurdities. They realized a family facing federal indictments for financial crimes was probably lying about a helpless daughter locking them out of a ranch. The anger the community felt over the hurricane damage found a new, highly deserving target. I imagined my mother sitting in a plush armchair in the lobby of some expensive inland hotel. I pictured her manicured fingers trembling over her phone screen. I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She was scrambling to hit the delete button. She was desperately trying to erase the post to hide the digital footprint of her smear campaign. But the internet never forgets. Other users had already taken screenshots of her lies. They were reposting her initial claims side by side with the news articles of Cameron's impending arrest. Her country club friends, the wealthy socialites whose approval she valued more than her own children, were watching the broadcast. They were reading the local forums. Nancy's pristine social standing, the armor she wore to deflect reality, was dissolving in front of her eyes. She could not spin this. She could not host a charity luncheon to repair a federal investigation. I locked my phone and set it on the coffee table. The social warfare was over. The truth had outpaced their lies, leaving their reputations in ruins. But cornered animals are inherently unpredictable. Donovan and Nancy no longer had their wealth, their social shield, or their golden child to hide behind. The bank accounts were frozen. The insurance claim was void. The commercial lenders were preparing to seize their remaining assets. They had nothing left to lose. Mitchell stood in the doorway of the living room, watching the news broadcast with a grim expression. "They are going to panic," he warned, echoing my exact thoughts. "Your father knows the county fraud investigators are coming for the original quitclaim paperwork. He knows the corrupted notary is going to fold under pressure. If he possesses any physical evidence of his bribery, any original ledger or unrecorded document, he is going to try to destroy it before the feds expand the raid from Austin to Houston." I looked toward the dark hallway leading to my grandfather's old study. The antique roll-top desk. The heavy steel floor safe hidden beneath the Persian rug. Donovan used to use that safe to store his private business journals when he visited the ranch. He always assumed the property was secure. He never bothered to clean it out. He left something here, I realized. The puzzle pieces snapping into a rigid, terrifying shape. When he packed that leather briefcase yesterday, he was in a rush. He took the equity papers, but he left the underlying proof in the floor safe. Mitchell checked his wristwatch. The sun is down. The highways are dark. If he wants to destroy the evidence before the bank issues a discovery subpoena tomorrow morning, he only has one window of opportunity. "He is coming back tonight," I said, my voice hardening. The legal shield had done its job. It had stripped my parents of their power. But laws and injunctions meant nothing to a man staring a prison sentence in the face. Donovan was going to return to the ranch under the cover of darkness, and this time, he would not bother bringing a locksmith. He was going to bring a crowbar. The evening dragged on, heavy with the humid exhaustion that always follows a Gulf Coast storm. Mitchell had retired to the guest room to compile the final affidavits his expensive suit exchanged for wrinkled slacks. I sat at the kitchen island, staring out at the pitch-black pastures. The generator hummed a steady rhythm, keeping the interior lights blazing against the darkness. My phone broke the silence, vibrating against the granite countertop. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 times before hitting accept, keeping the device on speakerphone. Paula Nancy gasped, her voice thick with hysterical, ragged sobs. "Oh, Paula, please pick up." I leaned forward. "I am here." She let out a dramatic wail, a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera. "He lied to me, Paula. He lied to both of us. I had no idea about the holding company. I swear to you, I did not know about the mortgage fraud or the notary. I just saw the news about Cameron. Donovan is out of his mind. He is talking about fleeing the state. I left him at the hotel. I am driving down the highway right now. Please, I have nowhere else to go." I listened carefully to the cadence of her voice. Nancy was a master manipulator, but she always possessed a specific tell when she lied. Her breathing was too controlled between the sobs. Real panic is chaotic. Her performance was rehearsed. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "The gates are locked." "Paula, please. I am your mother. I am terrified. He might come after me. Just let me sleep in the guest room tonight. I will leave in the morning. I am 10 minutes away." I looked toward the hallway leading to the grandfather's study. The heavy steel floor safe hidden beneath the Persian rug suddenly felt like a beacon. She wasn't fleeing Donovan. She was serving as his advanced scout, trying to secure a legitimate reason to enter the property so she could unlock the front door from the inside. "If you are terrified, Mom, you should drive directly to the county sheriff's station," I replied. "They have emergency cots for displaced storm victims. Do not come here." I ended the call before she could launch into another fabricated plea. I stood up and walked down the hallway, bypassing the guest room where Mitchell slept, and entered the master bedroom. I did not turn on the lights. I walked to the window overlooking the front gate and peered through the blinds. The rural road was completely dark, devoid of streetlights, but I knew the layout of my property intimately. I knew the blind spots. I knew the exact patch of soft earth near the western fence line where the ancient oak tree had fallen during the hurricane, crushing a section of the iron perimeter. I pulled my rugged tablet from my go bag and opened the security application. The solar-powered trail cameras were still broadcasting on the private network. I switched the feed to camera 3, the unit hidden high in the branches overlooking the damaged western fence. The screen glowed with harsh night vision green. For 10 minutes, nothing moved except the Spanish moss swaying in the humid breeze. Then, 2 figures appeared at the edge of the frame: Donovan and Nancy. They were not driving their luxury SUV. They had parked somewhere down the road and hiked through the muddy ditch to avoid the main gate. Donovan carried a heavy crowbar. Nancy carried a large canvas tote bag. They squeezed through the gap in the crushed fencing, trespassing on the land they had tried to steal. I did not scream. I did not run downstairs to confront them. I felt a profound, chilling calm wash over me. The trap was set, and they had just walked directly into the jaws. I closed the bedroom door and slid the heavy brass deadbolt into place. I picked up my phone and dialed the county dispatch. 911, what is your emergency? "My name is Paula McDonald. I live at the Coastal Ranch on County Road 4. 2 individuals just breached my western perimeter fence. They are armed with a crowbar and are currently breaking into my home." "Are you in a safe location, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked, her voice urgent. "I am locked in the master bedroom," I confirmed. "Stay on the line. Deputies are en route." I set the phone on the nightstand and picked up the tablet. I watched the live feed as my parents approached the rear patio. Donovan jammed the flattened end of the iron crowbar into the seam of the sliding glass door. He threw his weight against it. The reinforced glass held for a moment before the lock mechanism shattered with a loud, distinct crack that echoed through the quiet house. They slipped inside, moving quickly and quietly. They did not head up the stairs toward my bedroom. They did not search for me. They moved directly down the main hallway toward the grandfather's study. I switched the camera feed to the interior unit I had installed in the hallway ceiling years ago to monitor the rescue dogs while I worked at the clinic. The high-definition lens captured their every move. Donovan shoved the heavy mahogany desk aside. Nancy fell to her knees, rolling back the antique Persian rug to reveal the steel floor safe. Donovan dropped the crowbar and began spinning the dial, his hands shaking with frantic desperation. He knew the combination. He opened the heavy steel door and began frantically pulling out thick manila folders. He was searching for the original ledger, the physical notebook where he documented the $5,000 bribe to the corrupt country club notary. It was the only tangible piece of evidence connecting him directly to the forgery, and he needed it destroyed before the federal agents inevitably expanded their raid from Austin to Houston. He found a leather-bound notebook and shoved it into Nancy's canvas tote bag. "Let's go," he hissed, his voice captured clearly by the camera's internal microphone. "We have it." Before they could reach the shattered patio door, the front yard erupted in strobing red and blue lights. 3 county sheriff cruisers slammed to a halt on the gravel driveway, their sirens cut, executing a silent approach. Heavy boots hit the porch steps. "Sheriff's Department, come out with your hands empty," the command echoed through the broken patio door. Donovan froze in the hallway, the canvas tote bag clutched in his hand. Nancy let out a genuine, terrified scream. I unlocked my bedroom door and walked down the stairs, the rugged tablet held securely in my grip. The deputies had already entered the house through the compromised patio, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, illuminating my parents backed against the study wall. "Drop the bag," the lead deputy ordered, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered weapon. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding," Donovan stammered, raising his empty hands, while Nancy dropped the tote bag onto the hardwood floor. "I am the owner of this property. I am securing my assets after the storm." The deputy looked at the shattered glass, the heavy crowbar resting near the safe, and the terrified expression on Nancy's face. He then looked up as I descended the final stair. "Ma'am," the deputy addressed me, "are you the homeowner?" "I am," I replied, stepping into the light of the hallway. "Paula, tell them," Donovan pleaded, his voice cracking with panic. "Tell them we are family." I looked at the man who had left me in the dark to die. The man who had stolen my title. The man who had broken into my sanctuary to destroy evidence of a felony. "They are trespassers," I stated firmly, handing the tablet to the lead deputy. The live security feed captured the entire break-in. They used a crowbar to force entry and attempted to steal documents from my floor safe. The deputy glanced at the high-definition footage playing on the screen. The evidence was absolute. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Donovan McDonald, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, trespassing, and attempted burglary," the deputy announced, stepping forward and securing my father's wrists behind his back. Nancy collapsed against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably. This time, the performance was entirely real. The polished country club socialite was being read her Miranda rights in the ruined hallway of the ranch she despised. I watched as the deputies marched my parents out the front door and secured them in the back of the cruisers. The strobing lights painted the ancient oak trees in harsh, flashing colors. The night raid was over. The physical threat was neutralized. My father had walked into a trap of his own making, trading his freedom for a desperate attempt to hide his crimes. The federal authorities were already dismantling Cameron and Austin, and now the county sheriff was delivering Donovan straight into a holding cell. The financial house of cards was collapsing, and they had absolutely nowhere left to run. The morning after the arrests arrived with a deceptive tranquility. The humid Texas heat began to bake the damp earth, drawing a thin mist over the damaged pastures. I stood in the kitchen, sipping black coffee, staring at the blue plastic tarp I had taped over the shattered patio door. The physical wounds to the ranch were minor, easily repaired with a few trips to the hardware store. The wounds my parents inflicted on their own lives were terminal. Mitchell did not sleep. When I walked into the dining room, he was already dressed in a fresh shirt, his laptop glowing, a sleek wireless earpiece tucked into his ear. He typed with a relentless, punishing rhythm. The legal litigator thrived in the chaos of corporate collapse. He was not just building a defense, he was orchestrating a financial demolition. "We found him," Mitchell stated, ending his call and looking up from the screen. "Richard Vance, the corrupt notary." I pulled out a wooden chair and sat down. My father always surrounded himself with men like Richard. Men who desired the country club lifestyle but lacked the capital to sustain it. Donovan treated them like loyal servants, tossing them lucrative consulting fees or exclusive golf invitations in exchange for moral flexibility. Richard stamped the fraudulent quitclaim deed to earn my father's favor, assuming the transaction would vanish into the opaque depths of a corporate holding company. He made a fatal error, Mitchell explained, a predatory glint in his eye. Richard lived on the seawall in Galveston. The irony hit me with the force of a physical blow. The storm surge that destroyed my parents' luxury oceanfront condominium had also leveled their co-conspirators' home. Richard Vance was currently homeless, his possessions washed into the Gulf of Mexico. Mitchell turned his monitor toward me. I had a private investigator track him down. Richard is sitting in a crowded disaster relief shelter on the mainland, wearing borrowed clothes, trying to figure out how to rebuild his life. He is desperate, terrified, and acutely aware that he is vulnerable. My team just paid him a visit. You offered him a deal, I concluded. I offered him survival, Mitchell corrected. I drafted a sworn affidavit detailing exactly how Donovan orchestrated the bribery. I gave Richard a choice. He could sign the confession, turn state's evidence, and let me direct the district attorney's fury solely toward your father, or he could refuse, and I would personally ensure he spent the next 10 years in a state penitentiary for real estate fraud. A man sleeping on a canvas cot in a gymnasium does not possess the fortitude to protect a wealthy patron who is currently sitting in a county jail cell. Richard folded in less than 5 minutes. He signed the affidavit, provided the digital correspondence between himself and Donovan, and handed over the exact date and time the $5,000 bribe cleared his bank account. "We have the kill shot," Mitchell said, hitting the send key on his keyboard. I just forwarded the signed affidavit to the commercial lender holding the loan for your brother's tech startup. The domino effect was instantaneous and breathtaking in its scope. Banks operate on algorithms and risk assessment. When the lender received undeniable proof that the collateral securing their multi-million-dollar loan was a stolen, contested property, their automated safety protocols engaged. The default clauses hidden deep within Donovan's contract triggered automatically. The lender filed an immediate freeze on the holding company. They seized the primary checking accounts, the investment portfolios, and the joint trust Donovan used to fund his lavish lifestyle. Because the Galveston property was reduced to a pile of wet rubble, there was no secondary equity to fall back on. In the span of a single morning, my parents went from commanding a sprawling financial empire to possessing zero liquid assets. They were locked in a concrete holding cell awaiting an arraignment judge, entirely unaware that the fortune they spent decades worshiping had evaporated. The shrill ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet focus of the dining room. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed an unknown local number. I answered, keeping the device pressed to my ear. An automated, sterile voice greeted me. "You have a collect call from an inmate at the County Detention Center. Press 1 to accept." I pressed the key. The line clicked, followed by the hollow, echoing static of a jailhouse payphone. Paula. The voice on the other end was fractured, stripped of its usual haughty elegance. Nancy sounded small, old, and profoundly terrified. "I am here," I said, leaning back in my chair, catching Mitchell's eye. He stopped typing, giving me his full attention. "It is awful in here, Paula. The smell, the people. They took our belts and shoelaces. Your father is in a different block. I have not seen him since the deputies put us in the cruisers." She was rambling, her breath hitching with genuine panic. "The judge set the bail an hour ago. We need a bondsman. They are asking for 10% in cash." I remained silent, letting her panic fill the dead air. "I tried to call the bank," Nancy continued, a rising note of hysteria creeping into her tone. "The automated system said the accounts are restricted. I tried the credit cards, but the automated service declined the charges. Something is wrong with the trust." "Paula, I need you to wire the funds to the bondsman." "How much do you need?" I asked. my voice betraying no emotion. $100,000, she pleaded, just to secure our release until we can sort out this banking error. It is a family loan. We will pay you back the moment Donovan gets the accounts unlocked. You have that emergency savings from the veterinary clinic, right? Please, Paula, you have to help us. We are your parents. $100,000. She wanted my life savings. The money I spent years scraping together, working double shifts, skipping holidays, wearing secondhand boots. She wanted the funds I saved to build my animal sanctuary. She expected me to drain my future to purchase her freedom, ignoring the fact that 12 hours prior she had tried to orchestrate my arrest and ruin my reputation online. I closed my eyes, letting the memories of the past 2 days wash over me. I remembered the heavy click of the main power breaker shutting off. I remembered the deafening roar of the hurricane tearing at the unfastened roof supports. I remembered hauling terrified dogs up a dark staircase, wondering if the walls would collapse and bury us all. I remembered the pristine white sneakers Cameron wore as he kicked a piece of storm debris out of his path, demanding I sacrifice my home to hide his federal crimes. They never viewed me as a daughter. I was a resource, a dumping ground for their burdens, an inconvenient obstacle standing between them and their greed. "Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, icy whisper. "The bank restriction is not an error. The commercial lender saw the forged notary documents. They know about Richard Vance. They froze every single account you and Dad possess. Your fortune is gone." A sharp, breathless gasp echoed through the receiver. The realization struck her, silencing the frantic rambling. "Paula, what are you saying?" she whispered, the terror now absolute. "I am saying there is no family loan," I replied, staring out the window at the resilient, unyielding oak trees lining my driveway. "Cameron is in federal custody for a Ponzi scheme. You and Dad are facing felony forgery and burglary charges. You built a house of cards and the wind finally blew it down. You cannot leave us in here!" Nancy shrieked, the thin veneer of civility shattering entirely. "We will die in this place. You owe us. We raised you, you ungrateful little—" I did not let her finish the sentence. The time for enduring her toxic entitlement had officially expired. The power dynamic had shifted permanently, the scales balancing with ruthless, inescapable gravity. I held the fate of their legacy in the palm of my hand, and I chose to let it fall. "I am sorry, Mom," I said, my tone echoing the exact cold calculation my father used on the porch before the storm. "Someone has to stay and watch the house." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, severing the connection. I set the device face down on the scarred oak table, embracing the profound, beautiful silence that followed. The air conditioning in the downtown Houston high-rise felt sharp and biting against my skin. 40 stories above the gridlocked streets, a sprawling corporate conference room served as the execution chamber for my family and their financial empire. The expansive mahogany table stretched across the center of the room, acting as a polished wooden barricade. I sat on one side, flanked by Mitchell and 2 of his junior associates. On the opposing side sat the people who used to dictate the terms of my existence. Donovan wore a wrinkled charcoal suit. He had spent the last 3 days out on bail, scrambling to assemble a coherent defense while dodging phone calls from furious creditors. His eyes darted frantically around the room, mapping the exits he could not use. Nancy sat beside him, her posture rigid, her face devoid of its usual country club cosmetics. The stress had aged her 10 years in a matter of hours. Cameron occupied the far chair, his shoulders slumped, his wrists resting heavily on his knees. The federal authorities had granted him a temporary release from custody to attend this mandatory mediation, accompanied by his own terrified defense attorney. At the head of the table sat the lead counsel for the commercial lender, flanked by 3 grim executives. They were the apex predators of the financial sector, individuals who cared solely about recovering their stolen capital. They initiated this meeting under the assumption that a civil compromise could be reached. They wanted me to relinquish my title to the coastal ranch, allowing them to liquidate the property and cover the debt Donovan accrued to fund the Ponzi scheme. My father cleared his throat, attempting to summon his old commanding authority. He launched into a highly practiced monologue. He spoke of familial duty, of unfortunate clerical misunderstandings, and of the necessity of preserving the family legacy. He looked at me across the expensive wood, expecting the quiet, compliant daughter to fold under the weight of his expectations. He actually believed he could negotiate his way out of multiple felony charges by demanding my surrender. I watched the distinct blue vein pulsing in his temple. His hands shook slightly as he gestured toward a stack of settlement contracts his defense lawyer had prepared. Donovan offered me a nominal sum, a fraction of the coastal property true value, promising to drop all future litigation if I signed the paper. He framed the insult as a generous concession, painting himself as the benevolent patriarch offering a troubled child a second chance. I did not speak. I simply turned my head and glanced at Mitchell. The ruthless litigator did not bother opening his legal pad. He did not raise his voice to argue. He reached into his tailored breast pocket and extracted a single silver flash drive. He placed the small device on the polished wood and slid it across the expansive surface. The metal scraped softly against the finish, coming to a halt directly in front of the lead bank attorney. "What is this?" the lender counsel inquired, his brow furrowing as he stared at the drive. "That is the conclusion of this mediation," Mitchell stated, his tone devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "My client will not be signing any settlement. She will not be relinquishing a single blade of grass. You are holding the definitive proof that the collateral securing your loan is a fraudulent fabrication." The bank attorney narrowed his eyes, picked up the drive, and inserted it into a sleek laptop. He clicked the first file on the directory. The crisp audio of my father boasting echoed through the silent conference room. Donovan's own voice filled the space, bragging about bribing Richard Vance to forge the quitclaim deed, detailing his plan to let the hurricane tear the roof apart for an insurance payout. Donovan flinched, his jaw dropping open as the recorded confession hung in the sterile, chilled air. Mitchell instructed the counsel to open the second folder. High-definition video played on the laptop screen, visible to everyone at the table. It showed my parents breaking into the ranch under the cover of darkness. It showed Donovan wielding an iron crowbar, attempting to steal the physical ledger containing proof of their bribery. The video ended with the county sheriff securing my father in steel handcuffs on his own daughter floor. Finally, Mitchell reached into his briefcase and handed a crisp paper document directly to the bank executives. It was the sworn, notarized affidavit from Richard Vance. The corrupt official detailed the exact time, location, and dollar amount of the bribe the borrower orchestrated to secure the fake title. The silence in the room became suffocating. Cameron buried his face in his hands, realizing the staggering scope of his father's incompetence had effectively doomed his own federal defense. Nancy stared blankly at the frosted glass wall, her curated reality shattering into dust. Donovan opened his mouth, searching desperately for a lie, an excuse, a technicality, but his own lawyer placed a firm restraining hand on his arm, silently instructing him to shut up. The lead counsel for the commercial lender closed his laptop with a sharp snap. He did not look at my father. He looked directly at the opposing defense attorney. The demeanor of the bank representatives shifted instantly from neutral mediators to predatory executioners. "We are done here," the lead counsel announced, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. The collateral is invalid. The borrower secured these funds through provable documented fraud. This institution will not negotiate a settlement on a criminal enterprise. We are terminating this mediation effective immediately. Donovan stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. Wait, you cannot just walk away. We can restructure the debt. I have other assets. I have the primary residence in Houston. I have the investment portfolios. The banker turned to his junior partners, ignoring my father entirely. File the emergency asset seizure forms before the courthouse closes today. Liquidate the remaining real estate holdings. Garnish the retirement accounts. I want every single dime this man possesses locked down by 5 o'clock. We will be referring this matter directly to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The executives filed out of the room, leaving my family sitting in the ruins of their own hubris. Donovan fell back into his chair, paralyzed, staring at the empty space where the bankers had been. He had walked into this building expecting to walk away with my home. Instead, he was leaving with nothing. His sprawling primary residence, his carefully managed stock portfolios, his luxury vehicles, all of it would be seized by a ruthless financial institution seeking to recoup their stolen capital. Mitchell closed his briefcase, signaling the end of our involvement. We stood up together. I looked at the 3 people sitting across the table. They were no longer the powerful, untouchable figures who had dictated the terms of my entire existence. They were just desperate, broken individuals facing the severe, unyielding consequences of their own greed. They had sacrificed their morals, their freedom, and their daughter to protect an illusion of wealth, and now the illusion was gone. I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy glass doors, stepping out into the bright, bustling hallway, leaving them alone in the quiet aftermath of their public reckoning. The Texas summer arrived with its usual suffocating heat, baking the damp earth into a cracked, hardened shell. 6 months had passed since the hurricane tore through the coast. The physical scars on the landscape were slowly fading beneath a blanket of resilient green undergrowth. The legal machinery, however, operated on a much slower, grinding timeline. The wheels of justice did not spin fast. They crushed everything caught within their iron gears with methodical precision. The commercial lender holding the fraudulent mortgage did not negotiate. They possessed no empathy for fallen socialites. They executed the asset seizure with clinical, unforgiving efficiency. Donovan and Nancy received their formal eviction notice on a Tuesday morning. The sprawling, custom-built Houston estate, the property they used to host extravagant galas and impress venture capitalists, went straight onto the auction block. I read the public filing online while drinking my morning coffee at the kitchen island. The bank reclaimed the imported marble floors, the dual climate-controlled wine cellars, and the pristine landscaping my mother spent decades cultivating. My parents were given 48 hours to vacate the premises with whatever personal belongings they could fit into a rented moving van. They had no savings to fall back on. The frozen accounts remained locked behind impenetrable layers of federal and civil litigation. Their credit scores plummeted into oblivion, rendering them invisible to any reputable landlord. Without capital or the social standing to secure a quiet favor from an old friend, they needed immediate, cheap shelter. The irony of their final destination felt almost scripted by a vengeful author. They drove south, retreating back toward the coast they had tried to steal from me, and signed a weekly cash lease at the Pelican Roost Motel. It was a decaying, single-story cinder block structure situated right off the roaring interstate. The establishment was distinguished by a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry hornet and walls layered in peeling turquoise paint. I knew the building intimately. 2 years ago, Nancy stood in front of the local city council wearing a tailored designer suit, delivering a passionate theatrical speech about preserving property values. She circulated a glossy petition demanding the town condemn and bulldoze the Pelican Roost. She called it a repulsive blemish that attracted transients and ruined the upscale aesthetic of the beachfront community. She demanded the town purify the neighborhood. Now she was carrying her remaining suitcases into room number 12. It was a cramped space, smelling of stale cigarettes and industrial bleach. The blemish was her new permanent address. She would have to look out her window at the cracked asphalt parking lot every single morning and remember the sheer arrogance that put her there. The women from the country club stopped returning her phone calls months ago. She was isolated in the exact squalor she once lobbied to destroy. While my parents settled into their dismal new reality, Cameron faced the full, unyielding weight of the United States Justice Department. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not offer generous plea deals to men who defraud investors out of millions to fund a digital mirage. The formal indictment came down in late October: wire fraud conspiracy and investor deception. The federal agents stripped his life down to the foundational studs. They seized the Austin penthouse, the offshore holding accounts, and the fleet of high-end vehicles he leased to maintain his manufactured image as a visionary innovator. When federal agencies seize luxury assets, they eventually liquidate them at public auctions to recover the stolen capital for the victims. I monitored the government listings closely, watching the inventory populate the digital catalogs. On a crisp Tuesday morning, I drove my reliable, beat-up work truck to a sprawling impound lot in central Houston. The fenced yard was filled with luxury sports cars, seized speedboats, and expensive machinery. I registered for a bitter paddle at the folding card table and took a seat in the rows of metal chairs near the front of the staging area. The air smelled of diesel exhaust and hot asphalt. I waited patiently through the liquidation of diamond watches and designer luggage. Then a familiar vehicle rolled onto the display block. It was the matte black luxury SUV. The exact same machine Cameron had driven onto my property the day after the storm. The vehicle he used to demand my surrender while kicking storm debris out of his path with pristine white sneakers. The dark leather interior remained immaculate. The high-performance engine purred with engineered precision, a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings of the auction block. The auctioneer rattled off the starting bid, his voice echoing through the crackling public address system. The crowd of bargain hunters remained quiet, intimidated by the notoriously high maintenance costs and expensive parts associated with that specific foreign brand. Nobody wanted the liability. I raised my numbered paddle high in the air. The auctioneer called the price, scanning the crowd for a counteroffer. Silence hung over the folding chairs. The gavel fell with a sharp, defining crack. I won the bid for a fraction of its original retail value. I walked to the cashier window and paid for the machine with a certified check drawn from the legitimate hard-earned savings I kept untouched in my local credit union. The money I earned by working overnight kennel shifts and splinting broken legs had just purchased the ultimate symbol of my brother's fake success. I did not buy the vehicle to cruise through upscale neighborhoods or impress strangers. I bought it for pure, unadulterated utility. I drove the pristine machine back to the coastal ranch and pulled it directly into my dusty barn. I did not bother washing the exterior. I opened the rear doors and folded the plush, heated leather seats down, permanently locking them flat against the floorboards. I laid down a thick, heavy-duty rubber mat over the custom carpeting to protect the interior from moisture. Then I loaded the back. I tossed in 10 50-pound sacks of sweet feed for the horses. I threw in coiled lengths of muddy fencing wire, a pair of rusted bolt cutters, and 3 large dusty bags of cedar shavings for the rescue kennels. The advanced suspension, designed to provide a smooth ride for venture capitalists on paved urban roads, handled the heavy agricultural payload beautifully. The luxury vehicle was now a glorified farm tractor. Later that afternoon, I needed to pick up a specialized antibiotic order from a veterinary supplier located 2 towns over. The most direct route took me straight past the Pelican Roost Motel. I pulled out onto the highway, lowering the tinted windows to let the warm, salty coastal breeze circulate through the cabin. As I approached the flickering neon sign of the motel, I eased my foot off the accelerator, slowing my speed to a crawl. Donovan was standing in the cracked asphalt parking lot, wearing a faded t-shirt and baggy shorts. He was staring blankly at a broken ice machine holding an empty plastic bucket. The deep, guttural roar of the high-performance engine caught his attention. He turned his head toward the road. Our eyes met across the short distance of the chain-link fence. He recognized the matte black paint. He saw me sitting behind the wheel of his favored son's prized possession. His gaze drifted to the rear windows, registering the heavy bags of livestock feed and the dirty fencing equipment stacked against the expensive leather. He realized I had purchased the crown jewel of Cameron's fraudulent empire for pennies, transforming it into a hauling truck for the exact rescue animals he had once mocked. I did not tap the brakes. I did not honk the horn. I did not offer a mocking wave. I simply held his gaze for 3 distinct seconds, allowing the undeniable reality of his defeat to sink deep into his bones before I pressed the accelerator and left him standing in the dust of his own ruined legacy. The coastal winter arrived not with snow, but with a sharp, cleansing chill that finally drove the suffocating humidity back out to sea. The air felt thin and crisp, carrying the scent of salt and crushed oyster shells. My breath plumed in the cold morning air as I stood on the wraparound porch of the ranch. I wore a heavy canvas jacket over my faded denim, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. I looked out over the pastures, evaluating the transformation that had occurred over the last several months. The minor roof damage from the hurricane had been repaired within weeks, funded entirely by my own veterinary savings. The new shingles were a darker shade of gray, blending seamlessly into the original architecture. The shattered dormer window was replaced with reinforced impact-resistant glass. The physical structure was whole again, but the true restoration happened beneath the surface. With the legal title irrevocably secured and my toxic family permanently excised from the narrative, I legally restructured the property. The sprawling acreage was no longer a dormant real estate investment waiting to be paved over by a greedy developer. I filed the necessary paperwork with the state, navigating the complex zoning laws and agricultural exemptions. The coastal ranch was now officially registered as a nonprofit wildlife and domestic animal sanctuary. The pastures were no longer empty fields of overgrown coastal Bermuda grass. They were active, vital spaces. I used the heavy-duty matte black SUV to haul lumber and welded wire mesh, constructing expansive, secure enclosures for the rescue dogs. I built a specialized rehabilitation pen near the tree line for injured local wildlife, working closely with the state game wardens to provide a safe haven for displaced raptors and small mammals recovering from urban encroachment. The barn, once a dusty storage unit for Donovan's unused riding equipment, was transformed into a fully operational, climate-controlled medical triage center. I was no longer just a veterinary technician working the overnight shifts at a local clinic. I was the director of my own facility, operating on the exact dirt my grandfather had entrusted to me. The financial house of cards my family built had collapsed spectacularly, leaving nothing but ruin in its wake. Cameron's federal trial concluded swiftly. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable digital evidence and the cooperating testimony of his former board members, his defense attorney advised him to take a plea deal. The golden child, the brilliant visionary who once demanded I sacrifice my home to save his reputation, was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and conspiracy. The Austin tech community erased him from their collective memory before the ink on his sentencing documents was even dry. Donovan and Nancy did not fare much better. The district attorney, armed with the signed confession from Richard Vance, the corrupt notary, pursued maximum penalties for the forgery and attempted burglary. My father, stripped of his expensive legal team and his formidable bank accounts, attempted to negotiate a reduced sentence by offering to pay restitution. It was a pathetic, empty gesture from a man who possessed zero liquid assets. He was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. My mother, claiming ignorance and pleading for leniency based on her age and deteriorating health, avoided active jail time. She was given 5 years of heavily monitored probation and ordered to perform extensive community service. The terms of her probation restricted her travel, effectively trapping her in the squalor of the Pelican Roost Motel. She spent her days picking up trash along the coastal highways she used to view from the tinted windows of her luxury SUV. The wealthy socialites she once desperately tried to impress now drove past her in their air-conditioned vehicles, pretending not to recognize the woman in the high-visibility vest. I did not visit them. I did not send letters. I did not answer the intermittent, tearful voicemails my mother occasionally left from a prepaid burner phone. I felt no obligation to offer forgiveness to people who only sought it when they were entirely out of options. Forgiveness requires genuine contrition, and my parents were only sorry they got caught. I walked down the porch steps, the gravel crunching satisfyingly under my heavy work boots. I headed toward the newly constructed canine enclosures. Buster, the pit bull mix, who had survived the hurricane, huddled in the dark hallway with me, was currently sprinting across the frost-covered grass, chasing a worn tennis ball with reckless, joyful abandon. Several other rescue dogs barked in greeting as I approached, their tails wagging furiously against the chain-link fencing. I knelt down and unlatched the heavy steel gate. Buster immediately bounded over, pressing his blocky head against my chest, his warm breath cutting through the morning chill. I scratched behind his ears, feeling the solid, muscular weight of his body. He was safe. He was fed. He was loved. He did not care about stock portfolios, corporate holding companies, or the opinions of country club socialites. He only cared about the tangible reality of the present moment. I stood up and looked back at the ranch house. The sturdy wooden beams, the wide porch, the resilient roof. My grandfather had built this place to withstand the brutal, unpredictable forces of the Texas Gulf Coast. He understood that a strong foundation was the only thing that mattered when the barometric pressure dropped and the winds began to scream. He tried to tell my father that, but Donovan was too blinded by greed to listen. My father believed that power was derived from control, deception, and leverage. He thought he could manipulate the world around him by pulling strings in the dark. He locked me in a house without power, assuming the storm would break me. He assumed the isolation would terrify me into submission. He was wrong. The hurricane did not destroy my life. It scoured away the rot that was already festering beneath the surface. It stripped the artificial siding off my family dynamic, exposing the weak, compromised timber underneath. The storm forced the truth into the light, and the truth proved to be the most devastating weapon of all. I walked over to the heavy gray utility box hanging on the side of the porch. The metal panel where Donovan had cut the main breaker so many months ago. I opened the door and ran my fingers over the row of black switches. They were all flipped to the on position, humming with steady, reliable electrical current. I closed the panel and secured it with a new, heavy brass padlock, slipping the only key into the deep pocket of my canvas jacket. I am Paula McDonald. I am 28 years old. I survived a Category 4 hurricane, exposed a multi-million-dollar financial fraud, and dismantled the toxic family that tried to erase me. I built a sanctuary out of the wreckage they left behind. I do not need their approval. I do not need their money. I have this dirt, I have my animals, and I have the absolute, unshakable certainty that I am exactly where I belong. The sky above the Texas coast shifted from a pale, bruised gray to a brilliant, unobstructed blue. The morning sun breached the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the pastures. I took a deep breath of the cold, salty air, turned my back on the utility box, and walked out into the light to start my day. Someone had to watch the house after all. And for the first time in my life, I knew with absolute clarity that the house was finally mine to watch. We are taught from a very young age that a storm is something you weather together. In the traditional American narrative, the family home is the ultimate sanctuary. It is the place where the doors are locked against the chaos of the outside world, where parents stand as the unyielding pillars of protection, and where children learn that no matter how fierce the winds become, they will never have to face the dark alone. But what happens when the architects of that sanctuary are the ones who intentionally leave the roof unanchored? The story of Paula McDonald, standing in the suffocating darkness of a Category 4 hurricane, is not just a tale of survival against nature. It is a profound, devastating exploration of what happens when the foundational values of parenting are replaced by the cold calculus of optics, favoritism, and transactional love. It forces us to examine the very bedrock of family responsibility and ask a terrifying question. What if the people tasked with protecting you are the ones hoping the wind tears you apart? In American culture, we place immense pressure on the concept of legacy and success. We often confuse providing resources with providing guidance. For decades, Donovan and Nancy McDonald believed they were fulfilling their parental duties because they possessed wealth, status, and a sprawling Houston estate. They poured endless capital into their son Cameron, buying him elite educations and funding his tech startups. They believed that by financing his path, they were securing his future. Yet they lacked the most vital currencies of raising a child: honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. They raised Cameron not to be a man of character, but to be a reflection of their own egos. By shielding him from every consequence and prioritizing his comfort over his integrity, they did not protect him. They hollowed him out. They turned him into a golden child who possessed no internal gold. A fraud who inevitably built a Ponzi scheme because he was taught that appearances matter more than reality. Conversely, they viewed Paula as a liability. Because she chose a path of dirt empathy and animal rescue rather than corporate prestige, they stripped her of their affection. They failed to recognize that true parenting requires meeting a child where they are, not where you demand them to be. When emotional awareness is absent, children are reduced to line items on a balance sheet. The favored child becomes a high-yield asset to be protected at all costs, and the unfavored child becomes a depreciating property, something to be leveraged, abandoned, or discarded when it no longer serves the bottom line. This transactional dynamic is the silent rot eating away at the foundation of countless traditional family structures. It is the insidious belief that love is something to be earned through compliance and success, rather than something freely given as a birthright. When a parent relies on deception to maintain control, like forging a quitclaim deed or fabricating a public smear campaign, they are not just breaking the law. They are shattering the psychological safety required for a child to grow into a healthy adult. Paula's grandfather understood this. He bypassed his own son and left the coastal ranch directly to his granddaughter because he recognized a fundamental truth: a parent who measures everything by its market value will eventually sell out their own children. Long-term guidance for children does not come from a trust fund. It comes from the quiet, daily demonstrations of fairness. It is born in the moments when a parent admits a mistake, enforces a fair boundary, and tells the truth even when a lie would be easier. Because Donovan and Nancy never modeled honesty, their entire family collapsed under the weight of a single, undeniable federal investigation. They built a house of cards on a fault line of deception. If we are to raise children who can survive the inevitable storms of adulthood, we must arm them with the truth. We must teach them that their worth is not tied to their income, their titles, or their ability to uphold a pristine family image on social media. We must teach them emotional awareness, the ability to look at a terrifying situation, recognize the reality of it, and stand their ground without shrinking to fit someone else's narrative. Stories like this one resonate so deeply because they hold up a mirror to the quiet fractures in our own lives. We all know what it feels like to seek validation from people who are incapable of giving it. We all know the exhaustion of trying to earn a love that is constantly kept just out of reach. If you have ever had to build your own sanctuary out of the wreckage left by the people who were supposed to protect you, you are not alone in the dark. Share your truth in the comments, and be sure to subscribe and follow Amanda Told Stories for more narratives that explore the beautiful, messy, and profound realities of navigating life and finding your own voice. Ultimately, the lesson here forces us to confront a highly uncomfortable, counter-conventional truth. We are conditioned by society to believe that blood is thicker than water. We are told that unconditional love means infinite forgiveness, that setting boundaries with family is an act of ultimate betrayal, and that we owe our parents a debt simply because they brought us into the world. But that is a comfortable lie designed to protect the architects of a toxic home. The truth is that unconditional love is not synonymous with unconditional access. You do not owe anyone your sanity, your safety, or your future, especially not the people who would eagerly leverage your destruction to fund their own delusions. Sometimes, the most profound act of family responsibility you can commit is walking away from the family itself. It is the realization that breaking a generational curse requires you to stop trying to repair a burning house and instead step out into the rain. The storm does not come to destroy your foundation. It comes to test it. And when the winds finally die down and the morning sun breaches the horizon, you might just look at the empty chairs at your table and realize that the absence of toxic people is not a tragedy. It is the quiet, breathtaking arrival of peace.